He bought a truck of forgotten luggage, but his dog found proof a dead Navy SEAL was never gone. A homeless Navy SEAL bought a truck of abandoned luggage. His dog found a secret that shocked everyone. Snow fell quietly over a forgotten Montana road as Caleb Ward opened the rusted truck doors, expecting junk. But his loyal K9 froze, staring deep into the pile like it remembered something he didn't. What they uncovered would drag Caleb back into a mission that was never truly over. Comment 1 or 0 and tell me where you're watching from. The snow came down in slow, heavy sheets, blanketing the quiet stretch of rural Montana in a silence that felt almost sacred. The kind of silence that swallowed sound and thought alike, leaving only the steady crunch of boots and the distant hum of wind across frozen fields. Caleb Ward stood alone at the edge of a cracked gravel lot, his breath drifting in pale clouds before him. His coat, once military-issued, now worn thin at the elbows, hung loosely over his broad frame. Time and hardship had carved lines into his face, but there was still something unmistakable in his posture. Discipline. Control. The remnants of a man who had once moved with purpose. Beside him sat Shadow. The German shepherd was motionless, his thick black and tan coat dusted with snow. His ears were upright, alert, scanning the world with quiet intensity. Unlike the men inside the diner behind them, Shadow didn't laugh, didn't judge. He simply watched. Across the lot, a rusted delivery truck rumbled to a stop. The engine coughed once, then died. Caleb didn't move right away. His gloved hands tightened slightly at his sides as he stared at the truck. This was it. $900. Every last cent he had scraped together from odd jobs, from selling what little he owned, from swallowing pride one day at a time. $900 for a truck full of someone else's forgotten lives. Behind him, the diner door creaked open, spilling warm light and laughter into the cold. "You really did it," a voice called out. Caleb turned slightly. A few men stood in the doorway, bundled in flannel and thick jackets, their expressions somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "Bought yourself a pile of junk?" another man added, shaking his head. "Man, that's one hell of a gamble." A third chuckled. "Hope there's gold in there, Ward. Otherwise, you just paid good money for trash." Caleb didn't respond. He had heard worse, much worse. The men lingered a moment longer, waiting for some kind of reaction, then retreated back inside, the door swinging shut behind them. The laughter faded, replaced once again by the wind and the quiet. Caleb exhaled slowly and stepped forward. "Stay close," he murmured. Shadow rose immediately, falling into step beside him without hesitation. The truck's metal frame groaned as Caleb approached. Up close, it looked even worse. Scratched paint, dented panels, a faded company logo barely visible beneath layers of grime. A man in a thick parka climbed down from the driver's side, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "You Caleb Ward?" the driver asked. Caleb nodded. "Sign here," the man said, handing over a clipboard. "Auction lot's all yours." Caleb took the pen. His fingers were steady, but there was weight behind the motion. Something final, something irreversible. He signed. The driver gave a quick nod, then climbed back into the cab. Within seconds, the engine roared to life again, and the truck pulled away, disappearing into the gray haze of falling snow. Now it was just Caleb and the cargo. He walked to the back of the truck. The doors stood tall and heavy, streaked with rust along the hinges. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at them. Not because he didn't know how to open them, but because once he did, there was no going back. This was everything. Food, shelter, a chance to get through the winter. Or nothing at all. Shadow shifted beside him, paws pressing softly into the snow. The dog's gaze flicked between Caleb and the truck, waiting, always waiting. Caleb reached out and gripped the handle. Cold metal bit through his gloves. He pulled. The doors groaned open with a long, echoing creak, and then stillness. Inside, stacked from floor to ceiling, was a chaotic mountain of luggage. Suitcases of every shape and size, hard-shell cases cracked at the corners, fabric bags stained and worn, bright colors dulled by dust, some tied with tape, others hanging half open, as if abandoned in a hurry. It looked less like storage, and more like a graveyard, a place where pieces of people had been left behind. Caleb stepped closer, boots crunching against the frozen ground. His eyes moved slowly across the pile, taking it all in. There had to be something in here, something worth the risk, something worth $900. Behind him, the wind picked up, rattling the loose edges of the truck doors. Snow swirled through the air, slipping into the dark interior like a quiet intruder. Shadow stepped forward. At first his movement was subtle, a shift in posture, a tightening of muscles beneath his coat. Then he stopped. Completely. Caleb noticed immediately. He turned, watching as Shadow's ears snapped forward, his entire body going rigid. The dog's eyes locked onto something deep inside the pile of luggage, something Caleb couldn't yet see. Shadow? No response. The dog didn't blink, didn't move. A low, almost inaudible sound rumbled in his throat. Not a growl, not quite. Something deeper, something instinctive. Caleb's chest tightened. He had seen that look before. Not here, not in Montana, but somewhere else. A different place, a different time. Where silence meant danger, and hesitation got people killed. Shadow took one slow step forward, then another. Snow fell heavier now, drifting into the truck, settling on forgotten bags and buried memories. Caleb followed carefully, his senses sharpening without conscious thought. Old habits. Old training. What is it, boy? Shadow didn't answer. He just stared, locked onto something unseen. And for the first time since the truck doors had opened, Caleb felt it. Not hope, not relief, something colder, something deeper, a quiet, creeping unease. Because whatever Shadow had found, it wasn't just another suitcase. Because whatever Shadow had found, it wasn't just another suitcase. Caleb didn't move right away. He stood at the edge of the truck's open cargo, the wind slipping past him in low, hollow whispers. Snow gathered on his shoulders, melting slowly into the worn fabric of his coat. But he didn't notice. His eyes stayed fixed on Shadow. The dog had gone completely still. Not curious, not cautious. Locked. Caleb felt it deep in his chest, that old, familiar tightening. The kind that didn't belong to this place. Not to a quiet Montana roadside or a pile of abandoned luggage. It belonged to somewhere else. Somewhere louder. Somewhere worse. Shadow, he said softly. The dog didn't break his stare. Another step forward. Caleb followed this time, climbing into the back of the truck. His boots landed against the metal floor with a dull thud, echoing faintly beneath the mountain of suitcases stacked before him. Up close, the smell hit him. Dust, fabric, old plastic, and something else. Something stale. Forgotten. He moved carefully, shifting a cracked red suitcase aside. Then another. Each one scraped and groaned as he cleared a narrow path toward where Shadow stood. The dog's nose twitched once, then again. His tail remained still, low, controlled. Caleb had seen this exact posture before. Afghanistan. A dirt road. Early morning. Too quiet. Shadow, then younger, faster, had frozen just like this, seconds before Caleb's team discovered an explosive device buried beneath the surface. That memory came fast. Too fast. Caleb blinked hard, forcing it back. Not here. Not now. He reached Shadow's side. What is it, boy? Shadow shifted slightly, then lowered his head just a fraction, his nose pointing toward a dark corner of the truck where the luggage had been packed tighter than the rest. Caleb followed his line of sight. At first he saw nothing, just more bags. Then, there, a black suitcase, older than the others, worn leather, edges scuffed down to gray. It was wedged deep beneath a stack of larger cases, almost hidden completely from view. Caleb frowned. That one? Shadow let out a low, quiet whine. Not fear, not panic. Recognition. Caleb's pulse ticked up. Slow, steady. He crouched, bracing one hand against a nearby crate, and began pulling the surrounding luggage away. The effort was heavier than expected. The cases shifted reluctantly, as if the pile itself didn't want to give up what was buried inside it. Snow drifted in through the open doors, dusting the surface of everything in a thin white layer. Caleb's breath grew louder in the confined space. One suitcase slid free, then another. Finally, with a sharp pull, the black case came loose. It dropped forward with a dull, heavy thud. Shadow stepped back just enough to give Caleb space, but his eyes never left it. Caleb stared down at the suitcase. Up close, it looked even older than he'd thought. The leather was cracked in places, the handle worn smooth from years of use. A faded airline tag still clung to one side, its ink long since smeared beyond recognition. It didn't look valuable, didn't look special, and yet, Shadow took a step closer again. Sat. Perfectly still. Waiting. Caleb swallowed. All right, he muttered under his breath. His fingers reached for the zipper. It stuck halfway. He tried again. This time, it moved with a slow, resisting scrape, the sound cutting sharply through the quiet. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb pulled the lid open. Inside, clothes, neatly folded. Nothing unusual at first glance. A dark jacket, a couple of shirts, a pair of worn jeans. Caleb exhaled slightly, tension easing just a fraction. Just another bag, he said quietly, almost to himself. But Shadow didn't move, didn't relax. Caleb hesitated, then reached deeper. He lifted the jacket aside. Beneath it, something shifted. Metal. A faint clink. Caleb froze. Slowly, carefully, he moved the remaining clothes. And there, tucked between layers of fabric, was a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Shadow leaned forward slightly, his ears twitching. Caleb's hand hovered above it for a second. Then he unwrapped the cloth. The cold air seemed to press in around him. Inside, a pair of military dog tags. They caught the dim light filtering through the truck's open doors, glinting faintly against the dull gray sky. Caleb's breath stopped. He didn't need to pick them up, didn't need to read them. Something deep inside him already knew, but his hand moved anyway. Slow, unsteady. The tags were cold against his skin. He turned them over, and the world seemed to fall away. The name stared back at him. Ryan Mercer. Caleb's vision blurred for a split second, his grip tightening instinctively around the metal. No, he whispered. Behind him, the wind howled louder, rattling the truck doors. Snow swept in harder now, carried by a sudden gust that filled the space with swirling white. Ryan Mercer. A ghost. A memory buried years ago under official reports and folded flags. Declared dead. Gone. Caleb's chest rose sharply, his breath catching halfway. Shadow moved then, slowly, carefully. He stepped forward and pressed against Caleb's side, solid and grounding, just like he always had. Caleb didn't realize his hands were shaking until the tags rattled softly between his fingers. He closed his eyes for a moment. And just like that, he wasn't in Montana anymore. He was somewhere else. dust in the air, voices shouting, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through narrow streets, and one name cutting through all of it. Mercer! Caleb's eyes snapped open. The truck, the snow, the silence. It all rushed back in at once, but the feeling didn't leave. Because this wasn't just memory. This wasn't just coincidence. Caleb looked down at the suitcase again, at the tags, at Shadow, who hadn't moved from his side, and for the first time since the truck had arrived, he understood something with absolute certainty. This wasn't about survival anymore. This wasn't about money. This was something else, something unfinished, something that had followed him all the way here, and had been waiting, hidden, buried. Until now, buried. Until now. The word lingered in Caleb's mind like a weight he couldn't shake. He sat there for a long moment in the back of the truck, the dog tags still cold in his hand, the wind pushing snow in through the open doors. Shadow stayed pressed against his side, steady, unmoving, as if anchoring him to the present. Caleb forced a slow breath, then another. He couldn't stay here. Not like this. Carefully, he set the dog tags back into the cloth and placed them inside the suitcase. Not out of rejection, but control, discipline, the same instinct that had kept him alive when everything else had fallen apart. Not yet, he murmured. Shadow's ears flicked, but he didn't protest. Caleb closed the suitcase halfway, then stood, stepping back out into the cold. The wind hit him full force now, biting through his coat, clearing just enough of the fog in his head to let him think. He looked out across the empty lot. Nothing had changed. The diner still stood across the road, warm light glowing behind frosted windows. Tire tracks from the truck were already fading beneath fresh snowfall. Life, as far as the world was concerned, had moved on. But Caleb hadn't. Not really. He turned back to the truck. There were still dozens of suitcases left. And right now, he needed something simple, something real, something that didn't pull him back into a past he'd spent years trying to bury. "Come on," he said quietly. Shadow followed without hesitation. Caleb reached into the pile and grabbed the nearest suitcase, a bright blue roller bag with a cracked handle. He dragged it down, set it on the ground, and pulled the zipper open. Inside, clothes, wrinkled, worn, nothing special. He sifted through them quickly. A jacket, a pair of shoes, a half-empty bottle of shampoo. Useless. He tossed it aside. Another suitcase. This one red, scuffed along the corners. Inside, old magazines, a broken tablet, a handful of loose coins. Caleb exhaled sharply through his nose. Figures. He kept going, bag after bag, each one opening the same way, hope, brief and flickering, then gone just as fast. Hours passed. The sky darkened, the pale gray of afternoon slipping toward early evening. Snow piled thicker on the ground, muffling sound, softening edges. Caleb's movements slowed. His hands were stiff now, fingers numb despite the gloves. His shoulders ached from lifting, dragging, opening. Nothing. Nothing worth $900. Nothing that could get him through the winter. He slammed the lid of another suitcase shut, harder than necessary. Damn it. Shadow watched him closely, head tilted slightly, reading the shift in tone, the tension creeping into his handler's voice. Caleb leaned against the side of the truck, breathing heavier now, frustration building beneath the surface. He'd seen this before too. Different place, different stakes, but the same feeling. A mission going sideways, information that didn't add up, the slow realization that things weren't going to end the way they were supposed to. He rubbed a hand across his face. "Just junk," he muttered. Across the road, the diner door opened again. Boots crunched through the snow. Caleb didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Still at it?" the voice called. Derek Shaw, local mechanic, mid-40s, the kind of man who always seemed to know more than he let on. Caleb glanced over his shoulder. Derek approached with an easy stride, hands tucked into his jacket, breath fogging in the cold. He stopped a few feet away, taking in the scattered luggage around the truck. "Well," Derek said, letting out a low whistle, "that's a whole lot of disappointment right there." Caleb didn't respond. Derek crouched, unzipping one of the discarded bags. He rummaged through it briefly, then shook his head. "Told you, man. Airport junk? Most of it's just leftovers nobody cared enough to claim." He stood, brushing snow from his hands. "I'll tell you what," Derek continued, glancing at the truck. "I'll take the whole lot off your hands. Save you the trouble." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "For what?" he asked. Derek shrugged. "Couple hundred. Cash. Right now." Caleb let out a short, humorless breath. "A couple hundred?" "Hey," Derek said, raising his hands slightly. "It's better than nothing. You're not going to make your money back on this. Might as well cut your losses." Caleb looked back at the truck, at the pile, at the black suitcase still sitting inside, half closed. Something about Derek's tone didn't sit right. Too casual, too quick. But Caleb pushed the thought aside. Not everything was a threat. Not everything was a setup. He needed to remember that. "I'll pass," Caleb said. Derek studied him for a second longer, then nodded slowly. "Your call." He turned, taking a few steps back toward the diner. "Offer stands," he added over his shoulder. "Just don't wait too long." The door shut behind him. Silence returned. Caleb stood there for a moment, watching the place where Derek had disappeared. Then he turned back to the truck. "Let's keep going," he said quietly. Shadow followed. Another suitcase. Then another. Time blurred. The rhythm became mechanical. Open. Search. Close. Toss aside. Open. Search. Nothing. The cold crept deeper now, settling into Caleb's bones. His movements grew heavier, slower. The pile of discarded bags grew. Hope thinned, until finally Caleb reached for another suitcase and paused. Shadow had stopped moving. Again. Caleb didn't even need to look. He felt it. That shift. That focus. He turned slowly. Shadow stood near the edge of the truck, body tense, eyes locked on the same black suitcase as before. The one Caleb had set aside. The one he had tried to ignore. A low growl rumbled from the dog's chest. Not loud, but unmistakable. Caleb stared at the suitcase. The wind howled outside, rattling the truck doors again, sending a fresh swirl of snow through the opening. Everything else, the empty bags, the cold, the exhaustion, faded into the background. Because no matter how many suitcases he opened, no matter how much he tried to focus on survival, it all kept coming back to the same thing. That one case, that one name. Ryan Mercer. Caleb swallowed slowly. "All right," he said under his breath. His voice wasn't frustrated anymore, wasn't tired. It was something else now. Tight, focused, like stepping back onto a battlefield you thought you'd left behind. He walked toward the black suitcase. Shadow moved with him, step for step. And as Caleb reached down, his fingers brushing against the worn leather once more, he knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. This wasn't over. Not even close. Caleb's fingers tightened around the handle of the black suitcase as the wind howled through the open truck doors. Snow swirled inside, brushing against his boots, settling into the folds of worn fabric and forgotten belongings. Shadow stood at his side, unmoving. Waiting, Caleb slowly lowered himself to one knee. The world narrowed. No more scattered luggage. No more empty bags. No more wasted hours. Just this. One case, one name, one piece of the past that refused to stay buried. He pulled the suitcase closer and flipped it fully open again. The contents hadn't changed. Folded clothes. Simple. Ordinary. But Caleb knew better now. He pushed everything aside, more carefully this time. Methodical. Controlled. Like clearing debris during a search operation, where one wrong move could mean missing something critical. Easy, he murmured, more to himself than to Shadow. His hands moved slower, deliberate. The jacket came out first. Then the shirts. Each item placed gently to the side instead of tossed away. The deeper he went, the heavier the air felt, until his fingers brushed something beneath the lining. He froze. Not cloth. Not loose. Structured. Hidden. Caleb's breath slowed. He pressed along the inner seam of the suitcase. The leather lining felt slightly raised in one corner, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it, or trained to find it. Shadow leaned closer, nose hovering just above the spot. A soft whine escaped him. Confirmation. Caleb nodded once. Yeah, I see it. He reached for his knife. The blade slid free with a quiet, metallic sound that seemed far too loud in the stillness. For a second, his hand hovered. Then he made a small, careful cut along the seam. The fabric gave way. Inside, a hidden compartment. Caleb's pulse kicked harder now. He widened the opening and reached in. His fingers closed around something solid. He pulled it out slowly. A sealed envelope, old, edges slightly yellowed but intact. Caleb turned it over in his hands. No postage, no address, just a single word written across the front in faded ink. Emma. His throat tightened. He hadn't heard that name in years. Ryan's daughter. He remembered her, just barely. A photo Ryan used to carry, a little girl with bright eyes and a missing front tooth, sitting on his shoulders. Caleb swallowed hard. Shadow shifted closer, pressing lightly against him. Caleb nodded faintly. I know. Carefully, he slid a finger under the flap and opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter, and beneath it, a small, crumpled drawing. He unfolded the paper first. The handwriting hit him instantly. Ryan's. There was no mistaking it. Rough, straight lines. The kind of writing a man used when he didn't have time to waste. Caleb hesitated, then began to read. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back the way I was supposed to. The words blurred slightly as Caleb's vision shifted. He blinked, forced himself to focus. I don't know who will find this. Maybe nobody. Maybe someone who doesn't even know my name. But if there's any chance this gets back to you, Emma, then I need you to hear this from me. Caleb's grip tightened on the page. The wind outside dropped for a moment, the sudden quiet making every word feel louder. I made choices. Some of them were right. Some of them, I'm not so sure anymore. There are things about this mission I couldn't explain. Things that didn't feel right from the start. Orders that changed. People who disappeared. Caleb's chest rose sharply. He knew exactly what mission this was. The one they never talked about. The one that ended everything. I tried to do what I was trained to do, what I believed was right. But somewhere along the line, I think we were sent in without the whole truth. Caleb's jaw clenched. His mind flashed. A convoy. Dust. Radio static. Then silence where there shouldn't have been silence. I don't know if I'll get out of this. And if I don't, I need you to know that none of it was because I stopped trying to come home. The words hit harder now, slower, heavier. You were the reason I kept going. Every step, every second. Even when things went bad, I held on to that. Caleb felt his breath shorten. Shadow shifted again, pressing closer, grounding him. If something happens, if this never reaches you, I just hope one day you understand I didn't leave you. I just ran out of time. The letter ended there. No signature. No goodbye. Just silence. Caleb lowered the paper slowly. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't think. The cold didn't matter anymore. The snow, the truck, the town. All of it faded behind the weight of those words. He looked down at the drawing still in his other hand. Carefully, he unfolded it. Crayon lines. Simple. Childlike. A stick figure soldier. A dog beside him. And a smaller figure, holding the soldier's hand. 3 figures. A family. Above them, written in uneven letters, me and Daddy and his dog. Caleb exhaled slowly, something deep and painful settling in his chest. That was you, huh? He whispered. Shadow's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Caleb ran a hand over his face, rough and tired. This wasn't supposed to happen. His eyes drifted back to the letter, to the words about the mission, about things not adding up, about people disappearing. A slow, cold realization began to take shape. This wasn't just a goodbye letter. It was a warning. Caleb looked at the suitcase again, at the hidden compartment, at everything he had almost missed. And suddenly, the past didn't feel finished anymore. It felt incomplete, unresolved, like something had been left behind on purpose, something important. Shadow let out a low, quiet growl, not aggressive, focused, alert. Caleb followed his gaze, back into the suitcase. There was more. There had to be. Caleb leaned forward again, heart steady now but heavier. All right, Mercer, he muttered. His voice was different this time, less confusion, more intent. What did you leave behind? And as the wind picked up again, carrying snow through the open truck, Caleb reached back into the darkness of the suitcase, knowing whatever came next would change everything. Knowing whatever came next would change everything. Caleb didn't pull his hand out of the suitcase right away. The wind howled outside the truck, rattling the metal doors. But inside everything felt unnaturally still, like the world itself was holding its breath. Shadow stood beside him, unmoving, his focus absolute. Caleb reached deeper into the hidden compartment. His fingers brushed against something thin. Paper. He pulled it free. Another folded sheet, smaller than the letter, rougher, like it had been torn from a notebook. One corner was creased, the edges worn soft with time. Caleb unfolded it carefully. Inside, a series of numbers, coordinates, written quickly, almost urgently. Beneath them, just a few words, not what they said. Don't trust. The sentence cut off mid-line. Caleb stared at it. The handwriting was the same. Ryan's. But this wasn't meant for his daughter. This was something else. Something operational. Something unfinished. Caleb's pulse slowed, not from calm, but from focus. The kind that came before everything sharpened, before every detail mattered. He read the coordinates again, committed them to memory. His jaw tightened. This isn't a goodbye, he said quietly. Shadow's ears flicked at the tone in his voice. Caleb shook his head slightly, eyes still locked on the paper. No. This is a warning. The wind surged again, pushing snow across the truck floor in thin, shifting lines. Caleb folded the paper and tucked it carefully into his jacket pocket. Then he reached back into the suitcase. There had to be more. He searched deeper this time, running his hands along every seam, every fold, every edge of the compartment. Nothing else. Just the empty lining and the faint smell of old leather. He sat back slowly. The silence pressed in. Behind his eyes, memories began to stir again. Unwelcome. Uncontrolled. The mission. That day. Caleb squeezed his eyes shut. But it came anyway. A convoy moving through a narrow valley. Dust kicking up beneath armored tires. Voices over the radio. Tight, controlled. But something underneath. Something off. Ryan's voice cutting through the static. Something's not right. Caleb's own response. Stay sharp. Then, the sound. Not an explosion. Not at first. Just a sudden, unnatural silence. And then everything at once. Shouting. Confusion. Orders that didn't match what they were seeing. Positions that didn't make sense. And Ryan. Gone. Caleb's eyes snapped open. His breath came in faster now, sharper. The truck, the snow, the present rushed back in, but the feeling didn't leave. Because now it made less sense than ever. They said you didn't make it, Caleb muttered under his breath. They said it was over. Shadow shifted closer, pressing against his leg, grounding him. Caleb rested a hand briefly on the dog's head, fingers sinking into the thick fur. Yeah, I know. His voice steadied. Slowly, he reached for the original letter again, the one addressed to Emma, and read a line over in his head. Things that didn't feel right from the start. Caleb let out a quiet breath. That mission. He shook his head. No. That wasn't just bad intel. It had felt wrong even then. But you didn't question. Not in the field. Not when lives depended on movement. Not hesitation. You followed orders until it was too late. Caleb looked back down at the suitcase, at the place where the compartment had been hidden so carefully. This hadn't been random. Ryan had put this here, hidden it, made sure it wouldn't be found easily, which meant he never expected to come back for it. A slow, cold realization settled in Caleb's chest. You knew, he said quietly. His voice carried a mix of anger and something deeper. You knew something was off, and nobody listened. Shadow let out a low breath beside him. Caleb looked at him. You picked up on it, didn't you? Shadow's eyes met his. Steady, understanding in a way no human ever could. Caleb nodded faintly. Yeah, you always did. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, the sound of boots on snow. Caleb's head snapped toward the truck doors. Shadow reacted instantly. His body stiffened, ears forward, a low growl building in his chest. A figure appeared through the falling snow. Derek Shaw. He walked slower this time, more deliberate. No casual smile, no easy tone. He stopped just outside the truck, hands tucked into his jacket, eyes scanning the scattered luggage, then settling on Caleb. You still digging? Derek asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. He watched him. Carefully. Measuring. Derek's gaze shifted slightly, just enough to catch the black suitcase, then back to Caleb. You find anything interesting yet? The question hung there. Too simple. Too direct. Caleb stepped down from the truck, closing the distance just enough to stand between Derek and the open cargo. Just clothes, Caleb said. Derek studied him, longer this time, then nodded once. Yeah, he said quietly. That's usually how it goes. But there was something off, something in the way his eyes lingered just a second too long, something in the way he didn't step any closer, like he was waiting, like he already knew. Shadow's growl deepened, low, controlled. Derek glanced down at the dog. Still got that one trained, huh? Caleb didn't respond. Derek looked back up. You sure you don't want to sell? He asked again, voice quieter now. Save yourself the trouble. Caleb shook his head. Not interested. Derek held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. All right. He turned, took a few steps away, then stopped. Without looking back, he spoke again. Some things ain't worth digging into, Ward. The words hung in the cold air. Then he kept walking, back toward the diner, back into the light. Caleb stood there, unmoving. The wind picked up again, stronger now, pushing snow across the ground in sharp, shifting lines. Shadow stepped forward, standing at Caleb's side. Caleb's eyes stayed fixed on Derek's retreating figure. Yeah, he said quietly. His hand drifted to his jacket pocket, where the folded paper rested. I think this is exactly something worth digging into. He turned back toward the truck, toward the suitcase, toward the past that refused to stay buried. And this time, there was no hesitation, only one question left. Where did those coordinates lead? And why had Ryan Mercer risked everything to hide them? Caleb climbed back into the truck. Shadow followed, and together, they stepped deeper into something neither of them could walk away from anymore. And together, they stepped deeper into something neither of them could walk away from anymore. The truck doors groaned shut behind them. Caleb didn't remember closing them. One moment the cold wind was tearing through the open space. The next, the sound was muted, dulled into a low, distant howl. Snow tapped softly against the metal walls, like fingers knocking from the outside. Inside, the air felt heavier. Still. Caleb sat down slowly on the edge of the truck bed, the black suitcase open in front of him. The letter rested in his hands, its edges trembling just slightly. Not from the cold this time, but from something deeper. Shadow stayed close, his body pressed against Caleb's leg. Always there. Always steady. Caleb stared down at the page again, even though he already knew every word. He didn't want to read it anymore. But he couldn't stop things that didn't feel right. His voice was barely above a whisper. The words echoed in his mind. And just like that, the present began to slip. The truck, the snow, the quiet Montana air. It all faded, replaced by heat, dust, noise. The memory came fast this time, stronger, uninvited. A convoy rolling through a narrow valley, engines rumbling low. The sun was sharp, cutting through the haze, turning everything into harsh lines and shadows. Caleb sat in the lead vehicle, hands tight on his weapon, eyes scanning every rooftop, every window, every stretch of road ahead. Shadow, leaner, faster, younger, sat beside him, ears alert, nose twitching. Ryan Mercer's voice crackled through the radio. You seeing this? Caleb remembered turning his head slightly. Seeing what? A pause. Then, too quiet. Caleb's grip tightened. He remembered that feeling. That same tightness in his chest. The same one he felt now. Stay sharp, Caleb had said. And they had. Every man in that convoy knew the rules. Silence wasn't safety. It was a warning. The vehicles rolled forward, slow, measured, and then nothing. No movement. No civilians. No noise. Just empty streets and closed doors. Caleb's heart had started pounding harder. Shadow had shifted beside him just slightly. A subtle movement, but enough. The dog knew. Before anyone else, Caleb had turned, watching him closely. What is it, boy? Shadow's ears had snapped forward, body stiff, eyes locked on the road ahead. And then, the radio. Voices overlapping, confused. Orders that didn't match the situation. Proceed. Hold position. Move now. Contradictions. Too many. Too fast. Caleb's jaw clenched. Command, confirm. Static. Then Ryan's voice again. Tighter now. There's something wrong here. The memory fractured. Sharp. Incomplete. Caleb's eyes snapped open. Back in the truck. Back in the cold. His breathing came faster now, uneven. Shadow immediately shifted, pressing harder against him. Grounding. Caleb reached out, gripping the dog's fur tightly. I got it. I got it. But his voice wasn't steady. Not yet. He shut his eyes again. But this time, the memory didn't wait. It surged forward. The convoy, the moment, the break, a sudden flash, not an explosion, but confusion, vehicles stopping, men shouting, "Where's Mercer?" Caleb remembered turning, scanning. Ryan's vehicle, gone, not destroyed, not burning, just gone, like it had never been there. The radio erupted. "Mercer, respond!" Silence, again. Then, gunfire in the distance. Not near, not far, somewhere wrong. Everything had gone sideways after that. Orders became chaos. Positions shifted without reason, and no one could explain what had happened. Not then, not after, not ever. The official report came weeks later. Explosion, casualty, mission compromised. Ryan Mercer, killed in action, case closed. Caleb had read it once, then never again, because it didn't make sense. It never had. And now it made even less. Caleb opened his eyes slowly. The truck walls came back into focus. The quiet, the cold, the weight of the present pressing in again. But something had changed. The confusion he'd buried all those years. It wasn't buried anymore. It was clear, sharp, and it pointed in one direction. This wasn't an accident, Caleb said quietly. Shadow's ears flicked. Caleb looked down at the letter again, at the coordinates now resting in his pocket, at the hidden compartment, at everything Ryan had left behind. You didn't die out there. The words felt strange, heavy, but they needed people to believe you did. Shadow let out a low breath. Caleb leaned back slightly, his head resting against the cold metal wall behind him. The exhaustion hit him all at once, not just physical, something deeper, years of unanswered questions, of doubt, of guilt. I should have seen it, he muttered. His voice cracked slightly. I should have known something was off. Shadow shifted again, nudging his hand gently with his nose. Caleb looked down at him. Those steady, unwavering eyes. No judgment, no doubt. Just presence. Caleb exhaled slowly. Yeah, I know, he said softly. He reached out, resting his hand on Shadow's head. You did. The dog leaned into the touch. A quiet moment passed between them. Stillness, but not empty this time. Focused. Caleb straightened slightly. His breathing steadied. The chaos of the memory settled into something else. Purpose. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded paper again. The coordinates. He stared at them. Not as a mystery now, but as a direction. A next step. You left a trail, Caleb said quietly, for someone to follow. Shadow's ears perked slightly. Caleb nodded once. Guess that's us. Outside, the wind began to die down, the storm easing, just enough. Caleb stood slowly, tucking the paper securely back into his pocket. He closed the suitcase this time, fully, and gripped the handle. This wasn't just a bag anymore. It was evidence, a message, a mission. He stepped toward the truck doors and pushed them open. Cold air rushed in again, but it felt different now, sharper, cleaner. The snow still fell, but lighter. The world hadn't changed, but Caleb had. He stepped down onto the ground, Shadow at his side. The frozen landscape stretched out before them, wide, silent, waiting. Somewhere out there. Those coordinates meant something. Somewhere out there. Ryan Mercer had left the truth. Caleb looked down at Shadow. You ready? The dog's tail gave a single, steady movement. Caleb nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. Me too. And for the first time in years, he wasn't running from the past. He was walking straight toward it. He wasn't running from the past. He was walking straight toward it. The snow had slowed to a fine, drifting powder by the time Caleb reached the edge of the lot. The world stretched out in muted whites and grays, the mountains in the distance barely visible through the thinning haze. Everything felt quieter now, but not safer. Caleb didn't go far. He stopped beside his old pickup, resting the black suitcase gently in the bed. His movements were slower, more deliberate than before. Every action carried weight now. Shadow circled once, then sat near the rear tire, facing the open road. Watching. Caleb glanced at him. You feel it too, huh? Shadow didn't move, but his ears stayed forward. Locked, Caleb leaned against the side of the truck, pulling the folded paper from his jacket again. The coordinates stared back at him, unchanged, but different now. Before, they were a mystery. Now they were a direction, a path forward. He traced the numbers lightly with his thumb, committing them deeper into memory. Montana wilderness. Remote. Off-grid. Exactly the kind of place something could stay hidden for years. Exactly the kind of place someone could disappear. Caleb exhaled slowly. Mercer. What did you get yourself into? The wind shifted again, carrying a faint sound across the open space. A door. Opening. Caleb's head turned immediately. Across the road, the diner door swung open once more. Derek Shaw stepped out. But this time, he wasn't alone. Another man followed behind him, taller, broader, wearing a dark jacket pulled low around his collar. His face stayed mostly hidden beneath the brim of a cap. They didn't laugh this time, didn't call out. They just stood there. Watching. Caleb felt it instantly. That same tightness in his chest. That same instinct. This wasn't casual anymore. Shadow rose to his feet without a command. A low growl rolled through his chest. Quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. Caleb stepped away from the truck, positioning himself slightly in front of it. Not aggressive, not confrontational, but ready. Derek and the other man crossed the road slowly, boots crunching through the snow. Neither spoke at first. They stopped a few feet away. Close enough. Too close. Derek nodded toward the truck bed. You still got that black case? Caleb didn't answer right away. His eyes moved between them, measuring. The second man hadn't said a word yet, but his gaze stayed fixed on the suitcase behind Caleb. Not curious. Intent. Caleb shifted his stance slightly. What's it to you? Derek's expression didn't change. I told you earlier, he said. Some things ain't worth digging into. Caleb held his gaze. Yeah, he said quietly. You did. A beat passed. The wind moved between them, lifting loose snow into thin spirals across the ground. Derek glanced briefly at the other man, then back at Caleb. I'll make you a better offer, he said. 500. Cash. You hand over that suitcase, we call it even. Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Funny, he said. Price keeps going up. Derek didn't react. That's because now I know what you found. Silence. The words hung there, heavy. Caleb felt it settle. You don't know anything, Caleb said. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. No, he replied, but I know enough. Shadow stepped forward. One step, then another, positioning himself between Caleb and the two men. His growl deepened. The second man shifted slightly, his posture changing, subtle but noticeable. He wasn't just standing there anymore. He was calculating. Caleb caught it. Every detail, every movement. Years of training snapping back into place. You should leave, Caleb said. His voice was calm, flat, not a threat, a statement. Derek studied him, then shook his head slowly. You don't understand, he said. That bag, it doesn't belong to you. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Doesn't belong to you either. Another beat. The second man finally spoke. His voice was low, rough. You don't want what's inside that case, he said. Trust me. Caleb met his gaze, held it. I already do. Shadow barked once. Sharp. Warning. The sound echoed across the empty lot, cutting through the silence like a crack. The tension snapped tight. For a moment, it felt like everything could tip. But then, Derek lifted a hand slightly. Not surrender. Not retreat. Just pause. He looked at Caleb one last time. Longer this time. More serious. You got one chance to walk away from this, Derek said quietly. Caleb didn't move. Didn't blink. Already did that once, he replied. Derek's expression hardened. Then he turned. The second man followed without another word. They walked back across the road, disappearing into the diner once more. The door shut behind them, and just like that, the lot was empty again. Silent. But the feeling didn't leave. Caleb stood there for a long moment, watching the place where they had disappeared. Shadow stayed beside him, body still tense, eyes scanning, waiting, always waiting. Caleb exhaled slowly. They know, he said. Shadow's ears flicked. Caleb nodded to himself. Or at least, they know enough to be worried. He turned back to the truck, to the suitcase, to everything that had just shifted. This wasn't just a buried story anymore. This was something people were still trying to protect, or hide, which meant whatever was at those coordinates mattered a lot. Caleb reached into the truck bed and picked up the suitcase again. His grip was firm now, certain. No more waiting, he said quietly. Shadow looked up at him. Ready. Caleb nodded once. We're moving. The wind picked up again, but this time it didn't feel cold. It felt like momentum, like something finally in motion. Caleb opened the driver's side door of his pickup. The engine coughed once, then turned over. Alive. He glanced once more at the diner, at the windows, at the shadows moving behind the glass. They had their chance, he muttered. Then he shifted into gear. Snow crunched beneath the tires as the truck pulled away from the lot, away from the town, away from the place where this all began, and straight towards something unknown, something buried, something that had waited years to be found. And now it wasn't hidden anymore. And now it wasn't hidden anymore. The truck pushed through the snow-covered road, its tires crunching over ice and gravel as Caleb drove deeper into the Montana wilderness. The town disappeared behind him within minutes, swallowed by distance and falling snow, leaving only the narrow, winding road ahead. No streetlights, no houses, just endless forest. Tall pines stretched toward the gray sky, their branches heavy with snow, forming a corridor of silence on either side. The deeper Caleb drove, the quieter it became, until even the sound of the engine felt too loud for the world around him. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, alert, not restless, focused. His gaze stayed forward, ears twitching at every shift in the wind, every distant sound hidden beneath the quiet. Caleb glanced at him briefly. "You've got a direction, don't you?" Shadow didn't turn, but his posture said everything. Caleb nodded faintly. "Yeah, figured." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded paper again. The coordinates stared back at him, precise and unforgiving. He didn't need a map to know where they led. Not exactly. But close enough. Remote terrain, high elevation, no easy access. The kind of place people didn't wander into by accident. The kind of place something could stay buried for years. Caleb folded the paper and tucked it back into his pocket. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "This is it," he muttered. The road narrowed, then split. One path continued forward, wider, packed down by occasional traffic. The other veered off sharply to the right, unmarked, untouched. Barely more than a trail. Caleb slowed the truck. Snow covered most of the path, but faint tire tracks, old, nearly erased, cut through the surface. He stopped. The engine idled. The world outside felt still, too still. Shadow shifted, then let out a low, quiet sound. Not a growl, a signal. Caleb looked at him. "You're sure?" Shadow turned his head slightly this time, just enough for their eyes to meet. Then he looked back toward the narrow trail. That was all Caleb needed. "All right," he said quietly. He turned the wheel. The truck eased onto the path. Branches scraped along the sides as they pushed forward, the sound sharp against the otherwise muted world. Snow fell thicker here, untouched, drifting in slow waves across the trail. The truck moved slower now, careful, measured. Every bump in the road sent a vibration through the frame, reminding Caleb just how far from help they really were. Minutes passed, then more. The trail grew rougher, steeper. Caleb leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on the narrow path ahead. "This better lead somewhere," he muttered. Shadow suddenly shifted again, more alert now. His body tensed. His nose lifted slightly, catching something in the air. Caleb noticed immediately. "What is it?" Shadow didn't answer, but he didn't relax either. Caleb's grip tightened. The same feeling crept back in. That quiet warning. That instinct. Something was off. He slowed the truck even more. The trees opened up slightly ahead, revealing a small clearing. Caleb brought the truck to a stop. The engine idled low. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Shadow stood. He let out a short, sharp bark. Once. Command. Caleb nodded. "Yeah, I see it." He killed the engine. Silence dropped instantly. Thick. Heavy. Caleb reached behind the seat and grabbed his pack, slinging it over one shoulder. The black suitcase followed, gripped firmly in his hand. The door creaked as he stepped out. Cold air hit him immediately. Sharper here, biting deeper. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he moved forward. Shadow stayed close. Scanning. Watching. The clearing stretched out before them. Small, surrounded by dense forest on all sides. At first glance, it looked empty, untouched. But Caleb knew better. He stepped forward slowly, eyes sweeping the ground. Then there. A structure. barely visible beneath the weight of snow and time. A cabin, old, weathered, half hidden by the trees. The roof sagged slightly, the wood darkened with age and exposure. Windows were boarded up, the edges worn and splintered. It didn't belong here. Or maybe it did. But it hadn't been abandoned by accident. Caleb stopped a few feet away. His breath drifted out slowly in the cold air. This is it. Shadow moved ahead of him, approaching the cabin with careful steps. His nose worked the air, his ears shifting constantly, alert, alive. Caleb followed. Every instinct he had was awake now. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. He reached the door. It stood slightly ajar. Just enough. Caleb froze. That wasn't wind. That wasn't time. Someone had been here, or something had been left unfinished. Shadow let out a low growl. Caleb's hand tightened on the suitcase. Stay close, he said. The words came naturally, automatic, like they had 100 times before. He pushed the door open. Slowly. It creaked as it moved, the sound stretching out into the stillness around them. Inside, darkness, dust, and something else, something that didn't belong to the outside world. Caleb stepped in. Shadow followed. The air inside was colder, stiller, like it had been sealed off for years. Shapes began to take form as his eyes adjusted. A table, a chair, scattered papers, and then a wall, covered, not with decoration, not with random clutter, but with something deliberate, organized, important. Caleb stepped closer. His breath slowed. Because what he was looking at wasn't just a cabin, it was a record, a story, left behind, waiting. And at the center of it all was a name. Ryan Mercer. Caleb's chest tightened. We found you. Shadow stepped forward beside him. Silent. Steady. And for the first time since this began, they weren't chasing a ghost anymore. They were standing inside the truth. They weren't chasing a ghost anymore. They were standing inside the truth. The cabin felt frozen in time. Dust clung to every surface. The air carried the faint scent of old wood and something metallic, like rust or forgotten tools. Snow filtered in through cracks in the walls, settling in thin lines across the floor. Caleb stepped deeper inside. Shadow stayed close, his paws silent against the warped wooden boards. His ears shifted constantly, tracking every subtle sound, every movement in the stillness. Caleb's eyes fixed on the wall. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Maps, pinned, layered, overlapping. Coordinates circled in red ink. Photos, grainy, distant shots of vehicles, buildings, people who didn't know they were being watched. And in the center, a photograph. Ryan Mercer, alive, older than Caleb remembered. Beard grown in, eyes sharper, harder, but there was no doubt. Caleb stepped closer. His breath slowed. You weren't gone, he said quietly. Shadow let out a low breath beside him. Caleb reached up and pulled the photo free from the wall. The paper crinkled slightly in his grip. Behind it, more notes. Handwritten. Ryan's. Short lines. Quick thoughts. Fragments of something bigger. Supply routes altered. Command override. Unauthorized. Contractors. Private. Not listed. Caleb's jaw tightened. This wasn't a journal. This was an investigation. Ryan hadn't just survived that mission. He had been trying to expose something. Caleb moved along the wall, scanning everything. More photos. More names. Some he recognized. Some he didn't. But one thing became clear. This went beyond a single mission, beyond a single mistake. This was organized, planned, hidden. "Damn it, Mercer," Caleb muttered. Shadow moved suddenly, sharp, focused. He crossed the room quickly, stopping near a corner where an old wooden cabinet stood half buried under debris. His body went rigid. Then a low growl. Caleb turned immediately. "What is it?" Shadow pawed at the base of the cabinet. Once, twice, then stepped back, watching Caleb. Caleb moved closer. The cabinet looked ordinary enough. Warped wood, one door hanging loose. But something about the way it sat against the wall felt off. Too flush, too clean compared to everything else. He crouched down, brushing snow and dust aside. There, a seam, thin, hidden. Caleb's pulse ticked up again. Of course. He reached forward and pulled the cabinet aside with a firm grip. It scraped loudly against the floor, revealing what had been concealed behind it. A narrow metal panel, set into the wall, locked. Caleb stared at it for a moment, then reached into his pocket. The knife came out again. He worked the edge into the side of the panel, prying carefully. It resisted at first, then gave. With a sharp snap, the panel loosened. Caleb pulled it open. Inside, a small compartment, and within it, a recorder. Old, but intact. Alongside it, a folded photograph and a thin file. Caleb's hand hovered for a second. Then he picked up the recorder. His thumb brushed over the power switch. He hesitated. Not out of fear, out of understanding. Whatever was on this was the truth. The final piece. He clicked it on. Static. Then a voice. Rough. Tired. But unmistakable. "Ryan Mercer. If anyone's hearing this, it means I didn't make it out." Caleb's chest tightened instantly. Shadow sat beside him, completely still. I didn't have time to send everything. Didn't know who to trust. Hell, I still don't. The recording crackled slightly. I was right about the mission. It wasn't bad intel. It was changed, deliberately. Caleb's grip tightened around the device. They rerouted us, pulled support without telling us, set us up in a position we couldn't get out of clean. Caleb's breathing slowed, deepened, focused. Contractors were already there when we arrived. Off the books. Not ours. Not anyone we were briefed on. A pause. Then, they weren't there to help. The words settled heavily in the air. I found files after. Names, payments, movements that don't line up with anything official. Caleb's eyes flicked to the wall again. The maps, the photos, the evidence. I couldn't report it. Not through command. It's tied too high. Too many people involved. Another pause. Longer this time. If you're listening, Caleb, then I guess you made it further than I did. Caleb froze. Completely. Shadow's ears twitched. You always said something felt off. You were right. Caleb's throat tightened. I didn't die in that valley. They needed everyone to think I did. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the cabin walls. I've been tracking them ever since, gathering what I can. But they're watching. They know. Caleb's heart pounded harder now. They'll come for this. For everything I left behind. A sharp crackle. Then, if you found this, finish it. Silence. The recorder clicked softly. Dead. Caleb didn't move. Didn't breathe. The words echoed in his mind. Finish it. Shadow shifted slightly, pressing closer. Caleb lowered the recorder slowly. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. "They set us up," he whispered. His voice was barely audible. "Left us out there like we didn't matter." He looked around the cabin again. Everything Ryan had built, everything he had risked, everything he had hidden. Not for himself, for the truth, for someone to find. Caleb exhaled slowly. The confusion was gone now. The doubt, the questions, replaced by something else, something clearer, colder. Purpose. He picked up the photograph from the compartment. It showed Ryan again, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 other men stood beside him. Faces Caleb didn't recognize, but one of them wore a jacket with a familiar insignia. Private contractor. Unmarked. Off record. Caleb's jaw clenched. "Found you," he said quietly. Shadow stood beside him. "Ready." Caleb looked down at the recorder one last time, then tucked it into his pack. "This isn't buried anymore," he said. His voice was steady now. Certain. They wanted it hidden. He looked toward the door, toward the forest beyond. But they're too late. Shadow let out a low, steady breath. And for the first time since stepping into the cabin, Caleb understood exactly what this had become. Not a discovery. Not a coincidence. A mission. One that had started years ago, and was waiting for him to finish it, and was waiting for him to finish it. The words echoed in Caleb's mind as he stood in the dim light of the cabin, the recorder still warm in his hand. Finish it. For years, Caleb had lived with the weight of that mission. The confusion, the silence, the unanswered questions that followed him into every restless night. Now, there were answers, and somehow, they had led him here. He looked down at Shadow. The dog stood still, watching him, not with curiosity, but with something deeper, something that felt knowing. Caleb frowned slightly. "You knew this place, didn't you?" Shadow's ears twitched. He didn't look away. Caleb crouched slowly, studying him. "When we got close, you didn't hesitate," he said. "You didn't search. You led." Shadow shifted his weight slightly, then stepped forward. Not toward the door, not toward Caleb, but toward the far side of the room. Caleb followed. The wooden floor creaked under their weight as they crossed the cabin. Shadow stopped near a section of wall Caleb hadn't fully examined yet. Darker, less disturbed. The dog lowered his head, sniffed once, then looked back at Caleb, waiting. Caleb felt that same tight pull in his chest again. Recognition, not his own. Shadows. "You've been here before," Caleb said quietly. It wasn't a question. Shadow let out a soft breath, then pawed once at the floor. Caleb stepped closer, kneeling beside him. His fingers brushed across the wood, clearing away a thin layer of dust. There, faint marks, scratches, old, worn, but deliberate. Caleb's pulse ticked up again. All right. He shifted his weight and pressed down. The board gave slightly. Not loose, but not fixed either. He slid his knife into the edge and pried upward. The wood lifted with a dull crack. Beneath it, another hidden space. Smaller, tighter, but not empty. Inside lay a worn piece of fabric, folded carefully. Caleb reached in and pulled it out. A K9 training vest, military issued, faded, but intact. Caleb stared at it, then slowly turned it over. On the inside, a name, stitched in worn thread. Shadow. The world seemed to tilt. Caleb's breath caught in his chest. No, He looked at the dog, then back at the vest, then again at Shadow. That's not possible. But it was. The evidence sat in his hands. The vest was older, worn in places Shadow hadn't shown in years. Used. Not recently, but not forgotten. Caleb's mind raced. Shadow had always been assigned to him. Always. That was the record. That was the story. But now it didn't add up. He swallowed hard. You worked with him. His voice dropped to a whisper. With Mercer. Shadow didn't move, didn't deny it. He simply stepped closer and rested his head lightly against Caleb's shoulder, the same way he always had. But now it meant something different, something deeper. Caleb closed his eyes for a second, letting the realization settle. You knew he was alive, he said, a slow exhale. And you've been trying to tell me this whole time. Shadow's tail moved once, low, steady. Caleb let out a quiet, almost breathless laugh. Of course you were. He shook his head slightly. All those times. The way you reacted to that suitcase. The way you wouldn't let it go. It wasn't instinct. It was memory. Shadow hadn't just recognized the scent. He had recognized the man, the place, the mission. Caleb opened his eyes again. The weight of it hit harder now. Not just the truth about Ryan, but the truth about everything that had followed. Shadow hadn't been reacting to something unknown. He had been leading Caleb back here. Step by step. From the moment they opened that truck. Caleb looked down at the dog. You've been carrying this longer than I have, haven't you? Shadow didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Caleb reached out, gripping the edge of the vest tightly. You remembered, even when I didn't. His voice softened. And you brought me back. A long silence settled between them. Not empty. Full. Heavy with understanding. Caleb folded the vest carefully and set it aside. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, respectful. He stood, scanning the room again, but this time he saw it differently. Not as a place left behind, but as a place built, maintained, used. Ryan hadn't just hidden here. He had worked here, planned here, trusted this place enough to leave behind everything that mattered, including this. Including Shadow's past. Caleb stepped toward the wall again, looking at the photos, the notes, the evidence. You trusted me to find this, he said quietly, to finish it. Shadow moved beside him, ready. Caleb nodded once, then his eyes shifted toward the door, toward the forest beyond. The world outside had grown darker now, the light fading, the temperature dropping, and with it, a new awareness. He wasn't alone out here. Not anymore. The memory of Derek, of the other man, of the way they had looked at the suitcase, at him, came back sharp. They're not done, Caleb said. Shadow's body stiffened slightly. Agreement. Caleb reached down, picking up the recorder and securing it inside his pack. Then the photo. Then the folded paper. Everything that mattered. Everything Ryan had left behind. Everything Shadow had led him to. He turned back to the dog. We're not just finishing this for him, Caleb said, his voice steady, clear. We're finishing it for everyone they tried to bury. Shadow stood tall beside him, calm, focused, loyal. Caleb gave a small nod. Let's move. He stepped toward the door. The cold air hit him again as he pushed it open. But this time it didn't feel like isolation. It felt like direction. Behind him, the cabin stood quiet, holding its secrets no longer. And beside him, Shadow walked forward without hesitation. Because the mission hadn't ended here. It had only just begun again. Because the mission hadn't ended here. It had only just begun again. The drive out of the mountains was slower. Not because of the snow, not because of the terrain, but because Caleb wasn't the same man who had driven in. The road twisted through the forest, branches scraping along the sides of the truck, the sound sharp in the fading light. The sky had turned a deep gray blue, the last trace of daylight slipping behind the jagged line of the mountains. Shadow sat beside him, quieter now, not tense, not searching, just present. Like something inside him had settled. Caleb kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly over the pack beside him. Inside it, everything. The recorder, the photo, the truth. Ryan Mercer's voice echoed faintly in his mind. If you found this, finish it. Caleb exhaled slowly. Yeah, he muttered. I'm working on it. The truck broke free from the dense tree line, rolling back onto the wider road that led toward town. The snow had eased here, leaving only a thin layer over the asphalt. Lights appeared in the distance. Small, scattered. Civilization. But Caleb didn't slow. He drove straight through, past the diner, past the lot where it all began. He didn't stop, didn't look, because he knew now. This wasn't about the town. It was about where this needed to go next. Hours later, the mountains gave way to open land. Fields, farms, small towns barely marked on a map. The kind of places people passed through without noticing. Until you were looking for something. Caleb drove through the night. No music, no distractions. Just the steady hum of the engine and the occasional shift of shadow beside him. Until finally, a sign appeared on the roadside. Welcome to Ashton, Idaho. Caleb slowed slightly. This was it. The address hadn't been written down anywhere, but he had found it. From the notes, from the names, from the fragments Ryan had left behind. Emily Mercer. Ryan's daughter. The one person who had never gotten the truth. Caleb pulled into the quiet town just as the first light of morning began to creep over the horizon. The streets were empty. Still, a few houses lined the road, their windows glowing faintly with early light. Caleb parked near the edge of a small residential block. For a moment, he didn't move. His hands rested on the steering wheel. Tight, not from fear, from weight. How do you tell someone something like this? He said quietly. Shadow looked at him. Calm, steady. Caleb nodded slightly. Yeah, I know. There was no easy way. There never was. He grabbed the pack and stepped out of the truck. Cold air hit him again, but it wasn't the same as before. It didn't bite. It didn't isolate. It just was. Shadow followed closely. They walked up the narrow path toward a small house at the end of the street. White siding, a porch with worn steps, a single light still on inside. Caleb stopped at the door. He stared at it for a long moment, then knocked. Once. Firm. The sound echoed inside. Footsteps followed. Slow. Careful. The door opened just a crack. A woman stood there. Early 30s. Tired eyes. But strong. She looked at Caleb, then at Shadow. Confusion flickered across her face. Yes? She asked. Caleb swallowed. Emily Mercer? She hesitated. Yes. Caleb nodded once. My name's Caleb Ward, he said. I served with your father. Everything changed in her expression. Not immediately, but enough. A shift. A crack. I was told, she began slowly, that he... I know what you were told, Caleb said gently. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What is this?" she asked. Caleb reached into his pack. Carefully, slowly, he pulled out the envelope, the one with her name on it. Emma. He held it out. Her hands didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she reached forward and took it. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against the paper. She stared at it, at the handwriting, at the name, and something inside her broke. "I've seen this," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "I've seen his writing before." Caleb didn't speak. He let the moment breathe. She opened the letter, read. Silence stretched between them. Long, heavy. Then a sound. Soft at first, then breaking. Tears. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady herself, but it didn't work. "He didn't leave," she whispered. Her voice barely held together. "He didn't leave me." Caleb shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "He didn't." She looked up at him, eyes filled with something between grief and relief. "Then where was he?" she asked. Caleb reached into the pack again. This time he pulled out the recorder. He held it out. "He was trying to tell the truth," Caleb said. Her hands shook as she took it. She pressed play. Ryan's voice filled the quiet morning air, and everything else faded. The house, the street, the cold, all of it disappeared into that moment. Caleb stepped back slightly, giving her space. Shadow sat beside him, still, respectful. They didn't interrupt, didn't move. They just stood there. As a daughter finally heard her father's voice again. When the recording ended, Emily lowered the device slowly. Tears streamed down her face, but there was something else there now. Something new. Understanding. "He tried," she said. Caleb nodded. He never stopped. She stepped forward suddenly and wrapped her arms around him. Tight. Unexpected. Caleb froze for a second. Then slowly, he returned it. Not out of habit, but because he understood. Because for the first time, this wasn't about the mission, or the past, or the truth being hidden. It was about what came after. Healing. Closure. Something that had been missing for far too long. Emily pulled back, wiping her face. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was stronger now. "I didn't think I'd ever know." Caleb gave a small nod. "You deserved to." Shadow stood beside them, quiet, loyal, watching, because in that moment, something had been finished. Not the mission, not completely, but something important, something human. And for the first time since this began, Caleb felt it. Not guilt, not anger. Relief, a small piece of it. But enough to know he had done something right. And that mattered more than anything else. He had done something right. And that mattered more than anything else. The morning air in Ashton felt different. Colder, yes, but clearer. Caleb stood at the edge of the small front yard, his breath rising in slow, steady clouds. Behind him, the door to Emily Mercer's home had quietly closed, leaving him alone with the silence of a town just beginning to wake. Shadow sat beside him, calm, still. No tension in his posture now, no urgency in his gaze. Just quiet presence. Caleb looked down at him. "Well," he said softly, "we made it." Shadow's ears flicked, but he didn't move. For a long moment, Caleb just stood there, letting it settle. Everything that had happened, the truck, the suitcase, the cabin, Ryan's voice, Emily's tears, all of it led here. And now, it was done. Not the whole story, not everything Ryan had uncovered, but the part that mattered most, the part that had been waiting all those years. Caleb turned slowly and walked back toward the truck. Each step felt lighter, not easy, not free, but different. The kind of weight you could carry without it breaking you. He opened the door and sat behind the wheel, his hands resting on the worn leather. For a moment, he didn't start the engine. He just stared out at the quiet street. "Strange, isn't it?" he said. Shadow jumped into the passenger seat, settling in with a quiet thud. Caleb gave a small, almost tired smile. "I spent years trying to forget that mission," he continued, "trying to outrun it." He shook his head slightly. "Turns out, it wasn't chasing me." He glanced at the dog. It was waiting. Shadow looked back at him. Steady. Knowing. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Guess we just needed to finish it." He reached into the back seat and pulled the black suitcase forward, setting it gently between them. It looked the same, worn, ordinary. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Caleb ran a hand over the leather. "You carried this a long way," he murmured. "Not just Ryan. Shadow. Himself, all of it." Then he looked up again. At the road ahead. The world stretched out in front of him, wide, uncertain, but no longer empty. "You know," he said, "there's still a lot in that truck." Shadow's ears perked slightly. Caleb nodded. More bags. More stories. He leaned back in his seat. People out there. Still waiting. Waiting for answers. For closure. For someone to care enough to look. Caleb let out a slow breath. "I think we're not done." The words didn't feel heavy. They felt right. Shadow shifted slightly, his tail moving once against the seat. "Agreement." Caleb smiled faintly. "Yeah. Figured you'd say that." He turned the key. The engine came to life with a low rumble. Not loud, not aggressive, just steady, reliable, like something beginning again. Caleb pulled away from the curb, the truck rolling slowly down the quiet street. The town passed by in soft colors and morning light. Simple, ordinary, but meaningful in a way it hadn't been before. At the edge of town, Caleb slowed. The road ahead split in two directions. One led back toward the mountains, toward the cabin, toward everything that had been uncovered. The other stretched out toward new places, new roads, new stories. Caleb paused for a second. Then, he chose forward. The truck moved ahead, tires humming softly against the road. Shadow sat beside him, looking out at the passing landscape. No tension, no urgency, just quiet readiness. Caleb glanced at him once more. "We'll take them one at a time," he said. His voice was calm, certain. "Whatever's left, we'll find it." The mountains faded behind them. The road opened up. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb didn't feel like he was drifting. He felt like he was moving, with purpose, with direction, with something worth holding on to. He tightened his grip on the wheel just slightly, not out of fear, but out of resolve. Because somewhere out there, more stories waited, more truths, more lives left unfinished, and now, he knew exactly what to do with them. The truck disappeared into the distance, carrying with it a man who had once been lost, and a dog who had never stopped guiding him home. Because sometimes, the things we think are buried aren't gone. They're just waiting for someone strong enough to uncover them. And in doing so, find themselves again. And in doing so, find themselves again. If this story meant something to you, go ahead and comment one below. or 0 if you think you would have walked away. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's what defines us in the end. And if you believe stories like this still matter, consider subscribing. There are plenty more waiting to be told.